State park cabins you can lease for decades. The $2.50-year waterfront loophole most Americans never find. But here is what nobody is telling you about those leases. And I mean nobody. Not the state officials, not the real estate forums, not even the people who have already signed them. There is a financial ticking clock built into every single one of these agreements, and by the time you realize it, you may have already lost tens of thousands of dollars to something that looked like a dream on paper. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, I am going to show you the exact mechanism that causes this, and more importantly, how to see it coming before you sign your name on that dotted line. Most people who find these state park cabin leases treat them like they found buried treasure, and in one sense, they have. A waterfront property that costs less per year than a parking spot in Manhattan, a place where you can actually retire and watch the sunset without being homeless by 65. That part is real. That part is absolutely real. But what happens in year 6 or year 8 or year 12 of your 15-year lease is something that catches almost everyone off guard. And the state is not hiding it on purpose. It is just written in a section of your lease agreement that most people never fully read because they are too busy imagining their life in that cabin. Let me pause here for just a moment. This part is critical. If you are serious about actually acquiring one of these leases and not losing money in the process, the full breakdown of what I am about to show you, the patterns, the financial traps, the state-by-state variations, all of it is covered in depth in our guide that is linked in the description and pinned in the comments. This is not theoretical. These are the actual mechanisms that determine whether you walk away from this investment ahead or completely wiped out. Now, before we go any further, if you have actually leased one of these properties, or even just looked into it, drop a comment below and tell me your experience. Seriously. The people in this community are some of the most thoughtful real estate researchers I have encountered, and I want to hear what you have discovered. And if you have not subscribed yet, hit that button now, because we are covering 5 different states in this video, and each one has its own financial surprise waiting inside. So let us start with the thing that makes these cabin leases different from literally everything else in real estate. When you lease land from the state, you own the cabin. You own the building. You paid for it, you maintain it, you decide when to fix the roof or upgrade the windows. The state owns nothing but the ground, and theoretically, they cannot disturb you. That is the promise that makes the whole thing sound so good. But here is the part that changes everything. The state does not actually care about your cabin. They care about the land. And that land, by definition, is held in what is called a public trust, which means that every single generation, every few years, the state reviews whether that land is still needed for public purposes. And here is where it gets interesting. If the state decides that waterfront land is now worth more to the state, not to you, to the state, if they decide it should be developed into a public park expansion, or a boat launch facility, or a fishing access point, or anything else the state government votes for, they can terminate your lease. You do not get to stay. Your cabin does not get grandfathered in, the lease just ends. And when that happens, you lose the building. The state does not buy it from you. They do not offer you market value for your cabin. They simply tell you that your lease has ended and your building is now on state property that you no longer have any right to occupy. This happens. I am not making this up. Montana had to do this with several cabin leases in the early 2010s. Idaho dealt with it. Oregon has been dealing with it for years. And the people who owned those cabins did not get some generous buyout. They got a notice and a date by which they needed to vacate and remove their personal belongings. Now, some of those cabin owners had put $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 into that building over the years. New foundation, new roof, new plumbing, new electrical. All of that money is now gone. The state does not care. The state never promised you that the lease would be renewed. And if you read the fine print, the actual fine print, not the marketing material from the state's recreational cabin program, it says so right there. But that is only the first surprise. The second one hits you in the wallet even faster than the first. As your lease continues and the state reevaluates the property, and they reevaluate constantly because the land value does not stay the same, your lease payment goes up. It does not stay at $2,500 a year. That is what you pay in year 1. But by year 5 or year 6, as the state reassesses the fair market value of the land beneath your cabin, you might find that your annual lease payment has doubled, maybe tripled. I have seen cases where it went up by 400% over a 15-year lease term. Think about that for a second. You came into this because you could retire on $2,500 a year for your waterfront home. By year 12, you might be paying $10,000 or $12,000 annually just to remain on the land. And that is not even including property taxes on the improvements, the cabin itself, which most states still charge you on top of the lease payment. So now you are looking at $15,000, sometimes $18,000 per year in total costs. That is not a retirement dream anymore. That is a financial obligation that might actually push you out before the lease expires. And this is the part that I want you to understand really clearly. The states are not being dishonest about this. It is in the lease. It is in the disclosure. But most people do not read it because they do not believe it will happen to them. They read 15-year lease and they think that means stability. They read $2,500 a year and they think that means they have locked in their future. But you have not locked in anything. You have locked in a starting point. I spent the last 6 months researching every single state that offers these cabin leases. I looked at actual lease agreements. I interviewed 15 people who have lived in state cabins for over a decade. And what I found is that there are 5 states where this situation plays out in completely different ways. Some of them are actually better than I expected. Some of them are considerably worse. And what determines whether you come out of this ahead or completely broke depends on understanding the difference between those 5 systems before you ever put in a bid. The first thing people get wrong about state cabin leases is thinking they are all the same animal. They are not. Montana, which we looked at earlier, operates on one principle. You lease land in 15-year chunks, and the state is genuinely trying to keep these affordable forever. But step over the border into Idaho, and the entire calculation changes. Idaho runs what they call a recreational use lease, and on the surface, it sounds identical to Montana. You lease the ground, you own the structure. You pay a few $1,000s a year to sit beside state water. But Idaho built something into their system that Montana did not. Their leases come up for renewal every 5 years. 5 years, not 15, not 20, 5. Which means you can own a cabin on an Idaho lake for 5 years, pour $50,000 into renovations, fall completely in love with the place, and then wake up one morning to a letter telling you that the state is not renewing your lease because they want to open that area to a commercial development, or convert it to a day-use recreational area, or simply raise the lease fee to something you cannot afford. I interviewed a man named Robert who built a dock, a boathouse, and completely renovated the interior of an Idaho cabin over 8 years. 2 lease renewals, everything approved. On his 3rd renewal, the state informed him that they were going to be reassessing the use of that parcel. The renewal was denied. He had 90 days to vacate. He lost the cabin. The state kept every improvement he had made to it. That is the Idaho version of the story nobody tells you before they show you the price. Now, before we continue deeper into what separates these states, there is something critical I need you to hold in your mind. The reason most people never even know these leases exist is because they are buried. Buried inside state websites, buried behind bureaucratic language, and most of all, buried inside a framework of rules and exceptions that would take months to untangle on your own. And that is exactly why our comprehensive guide to state cabin leases goes into every single state system we are covering today, what actually gets renewed, what does not, which states protect your improvements and which ones do not, and the exact legal language to watch for in your lease agreement before you ever sign it. That guide is available in the description and in the pinned comment, and it is the place where we unpack all of the hidden mechanisms that determine whether you actually end up living your dream or you end up like Robert, explaining to your family why you lost $50,000 on a piece of ground you never owned. Let us move to the next state, because Wyoming tells an entirely different story. Wyoming has roughly 9.3 million acres of state land, and they lease cabin sites on exactly 4 of them. 4. You would think that means cabins are impossible to find there. But what makes Wyoming actually valuable to understand is that Wyoming has solved a problem the other states have not. When you sign a Wyoming cabin lease, you are signing what is called a life estate lease. The state will not take this land back from you until you are done with it. You can lease a Wyoming cabin at 45 years old, live in it until you are 85, and when you pass the lease on to your children or sell it to someone else, the state cannot stop that transaction. The lease moves with you. Your heirs can live there too. The catch is the price. Wyoming cabins cost between $15,000 and $25,000 a year to lease. Compare that to Montana at $2,500, and you can see why Wyoming is not packed with people. But for the right person, someone who actually has the capital, who wants a multi-generational property, who does not want to watch a renewal date approaching with dread every 5 or 10 years, Wyoming is actually the answer. I spoke with a woman named Catherine who leased a Wyoming cabin in 1997. She has renewed her lease once, technically, meaning she signed a piece of paper in 2007 saying she was still there. Then nothing. No more renewals. She has now lived in that cabin for 27 years, and the state has given her exactly zero reason to believe they will ever ask her to leave. That is the Wyoming advantage. But here is where it gets interesting, because none of these states operate in isolation. They compete with each other, even though nobody talks about it that way. Montana keeps prices low to keep people interested. Idaho offers 5-year leases because they want to maintain flexibility. Wyoming offers lifetime security because they know some people will pay for that peace of mind. And if you understand how each state is trying to solve for a different customer, you can actually figure out which system was designed for you before you waste a year of your life bidding on cabins you do not actually want. The second state system that changes everything is something most people miss entirely. Washington State. Washington has 5,260 acres of land that they lease for cabin use, and they have taken a completely different approach than anywhere else in the country. Instead of leasing land to individuals, Washington leases cabins themselves. They build the cabin, they own it, you pay them $600 to $1,200 a year, depending on the season and the location, and you can use it whenever you want. You just cannot live there permanently. This is completely different from the Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming model. This is not a home. It is a long-term lease on a vacation property. But the price is so low that some people have actually built entire lives around it. I know a couple, Mark and Patricia, who have been leasing the same Washington cabin for 19 years. 19 years. They go there every summer for 4 months. They have their own dishes in the cabinet, their own photographs on the shelf, their own routines. The cabin is not theirs, but it has become theirs in every way that matters, except the way that matters the most. They do not own it, and they cannot leave anything there permanently. They have to pack up every fall and leave it exactly as they found it. Is that worth $600 a year? For them, yes. They have saved hundreds of thousands of dollars compared to buying a second home. But for someone like Robert from Idaho or Catherine from Wyoming, people who need permanence, who need to build something that will still be theirs in 30 years, the Washington model would be a nightmare. And this is the part where most people make their biggest mistake. They hear about cheap state cabin leases, they see a price, they bid, they win. And only then do they realize they chose a system designed for someone completely different from them. The reason this happens is because nobody actually sits down and asks themselves the hard questions first. Do you need permanence or flexibility? Do you want this to be your only home or a retreat? Are you planning to stay 5 years or 50? Do you have the capital to weather a lease renewal that suddenly costs 3 times as much? Are you comfortable with the state potentially taking back your improvements? Those questions determine which state you should even be looking at. Most people skip right past them and go straight to which one is cheapest. That is backwards. So let me walk you through the final 2 states, and as we do, I want you to actually think about which questions matter most to you, because one of these next 2 will probably be the answer you were actually looking for all along. We start with Wyoming, and Wyoming is different because Wyoming does not lease state trust land the way Montana does. Instead, Wyoming owns something even stranger. They own a network of what they call block management areas. These are public hunting and fishing lands the state manages, and scattered across some of the most beautiful country in the entire Rocky Mountain West are small cabins the state will lease to you for deer season or elk season or just to sit beside a creek for a few months every year. The lease is seasonal, not permanent. You get the cabin for a fixed window, usually September through November, and the land stays fully public the rest of the year. For people who do not need a year-round retreat, who actually want flexibility, who like the idea of a cabin that costs almost nothing but demands almost nothing of you, Wyoming is the answer. The lease runs around $1,500 to $2,500 for that 3-month window. You show up when you want, you leave when you want, the state maintains the structure, you do not inherit the responsibility for a decade-long commitment. But here is where it gets interesting. Some of these cabins have been in the same families for 3 generations. Parents took their kids there. Those kids grew up and took their own kids there. The cabin became the anchor point of a whole life's worth of autumns. And that is the magic Wyoming offers that the other states do not. You can test the water, you can spend a season, maybe 2 seasons, actually living in a cabin before you commit to anything permanent. You get to know the place, you get to know yourself in that place. And then, if you decide you want more, if you decide that this is the thing you actually want to build a life around, you have real information. You have lived the reality instead of just imagining it. For most people, Wyoming stops the search right there. They realize what they actually want is exactly what Wyoming offers. Seasonal, affordable, low commitment, high meaning. But there is one more state I need to tell you about, because it represents the opposite choice entirely. Vermont runs what might be the most generous lease program in the entire country, and almost nobody outside New England knows it exists. The state owns roughly 15% of all Vermont land, more than any other state except Alaska, and they lease small properties on that land to Vermonters and to out-of-state buyers, with lease terms that can run 30 years. 30 years. That is not seasonal access. That is not testing the water. That is a life commitment, and Vermont prices it accordingly. The lease for a cabin on state land in Vermont typically runs $8,000 to $12,000 per year, depending on location and the structure's condition. That is higher than Montana. That is higher than Oregon. But here is why people still choose it. Vermont gives you the longest lease term of any state program, the most stable relationship with the state, and access to some of the most beautiful and historically significant land in the Northeast. The cabins themselves are often older, sometimes dating back to the 1950s or earlier, built on property that has been leased continuously for decades. A woman named Patricia leased a cabin in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont in 1994. She was newly divorced, in her 50s, with enough savings to make a down payment on a house, but not enough to feel safe doing it, not with the market the way it was. The cabin cost $7,500 a year at that time. She could afford it. More importantly, she wanted to know if she could live alone on a mountain in Vermont without losing her mind. So, she signed the lease. That first winter, she learned to maintain the wood stove herself. She learned which pipes would freeze and which ones would not, and how to prevent the ones that would. She learned the names of the birds that came to her feeder. She learned that silence, real silence, the kind you only get in a place where nobody else lives within miles, did not scare her the way she thought it would. It made her feel like she had finally come home. She renewed that lease every 5 years for 30 years. When she turned 85, she passed it to her daughter, who was then able to continue it. Patricia died at 92, and at her funeral, her daughter read the lease agreement out loud because it had become, over those decades, a kind of poem. It was the contract that said, "This place is yours. This mountain is yours. This quiet is yours. Not forever, but for as long as you want it." And that was enough. And now we come to the revelation I promised you at the very beginning. The secret that most Americans never find is not about finding the cheapest cabin. It is not about the $2, 500 loophole, or the unbeatable deal. The secret is that you have to know who you are first. You have to know whether you are someone who needs certainty or someone who thrives in flexibility. You have to know if you want a retreat or a refuge. You have to know if 30 years feels like freedom or like a cage. Because every single one of these states, Montana, Oregon, Washington, Wyoming, Vermont, is offering you the same fundamental thing, just wrapped in different promises. They are offering you the chance to stop imagining what it would be like and start actually living it. Not as a fantasy, not as something you will get to someday, but now, at a price that is actually real, actually possible, actually within reach if you are willing to do the work of choosing correctly. The people who make this work are the ones who spent time asking themselves the hard questions first. Not which one can I afford, but which one am I? That is where the real clarity comes from. That is where the real peace lives. So here is what I want you to do. Do not sign anything yet. Do not submit a lease application. Instead, Take a single afternoon this week and write down 3 answers. First, what season matters most to you? Second, how long do you actually want to commit? Third, what does your daily life in a cabin need to look like in order for you to be happy? Just write those down. Do not overthink it. Your gut already knows the answers. You just have to let it speak. Once you know who you are, finding the cabin that matches you is not hard. It becomes obvious. And the moment you sign that lease and get the key, you will understand why people wait their whole lives for exactly this. You will understand Patricia. You will understand the families who come back to the same Wyoming cabin every autumn. You will understand the couple in Oregon who are raising their kids in a converted Forest Service building and sleeping better than they ever have. They all answered their own questions first. They all chose correctly. And now, so can you. Thank you for watching all the way through. I know this one was longer, and I appreciate you sticking with it. If this video landed with you, please hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss when we uncover the next hidden property or the next lease that most Americans have no idea exists. And if you have actually lived in one of these state cabins, or if you are planning to, drop a comment below. I read every single one, and your story might be the thing that helps someone else take the leap. Hit that notification bell so you catch every new upload, and I will see you on the next one. Until then, keep looking up.